Funny you should ask. Just kidding. My first instrument was the drums. I think every little boy of 9 wants to beat on something. From there, and I did have a snare drum. My mom bought me a snare drum from Sears. And from there, I played the bass. Someone at my dad's job at the post office had a bass up in the attic. Just anything. I was just wanting to play anything. And my dad was on a mission to get me an instrument. And so I learned Willie Weeks' bass solo and Donny Hathaway's "Everything Is Everything." That was the first thing I ever learned. And then, I knew about my uncle because, of course, my dad would tell you my brother plays the saxophone, and so Uncle Peanuts lived in St. Louis for years and years. Though everyone in my family's from the Memphis area, he was a household word in that St. Louis area, but not so much in Memphis. But by the time I did start playing saxophone at age 12, I was fortunate that he came to visit, and so my dad had me go get my saxophone, and he said, "All right, so you play me something, And so I'm like honking on it. I thought it sounded really good. And then Uncle Peanuts said, "Well, let me see it, and let me see if I can play something on this thing." And so he plays, and it was like angels were singing, like for the first time, up close and personal, you hear somebody who's been playing an instrument for, 30 years. And you're like, wow, I didn't know it could sound like that. But that changed everything, hearing somebody who's really good. That's why it's important in these educational contexts to make sure that these kids are exposed to pros at an early age, My musical education began in junior high. I think that's a really wonderful and important political paradigm to say that it's still as important as ever for kids to be handed an instrument when they get to 7th grade, whatever grade that is, that this is a part of being human, is to experience music, not to just enjoy it, but to be involved in it. And so we were blessed that the federal government made sure that there were instruments in the public schools, and I was handed a saxophone. So from that point, I went on to high school and played in the jazz band. In fact, the director had heard about me from junior high. He said, "Well, yeah, I can hear you playing pretty good." He said, "How'd you like to be in a jazz band?" Now, again, at the time, I'm in Memphis. I'm listening to the Bar-Kays and Shaka Khan and Rufus and Michael Jackson and Jackson 5, and I'm like, no, thanks. I don't think so. And he said, "Well, let me rephrase that. You are now in the jazz band." So, in other words, it was coercion, and he needed saxophones in the jazz band, and you only had so many to choose from. So, first rehearsal, Straight Ahead and Strive for Tone was the name of the song. It's just sort of a rudimentary exercise made into a piece, and it changed my life. I'm like, wow, this is cool, So I was grateful for Mr. Roy McLemore, coercing me to be in the jazz band, and from there, I just started soaking it in. I was exposed to Hank Crawford, and then, just somebody who, right from the beginning, my reference point was someone who spoke through the instrument, as opposed to, well, here's a lot of riffs. He was always saying something. He was singing to you. And so that was my first reference point. Went on to college, to Texas Southern, and by then, before I got to school, my two heroes, besides Hank Crawford, were Ronnie Laws and Wilton Felder of the Crusaders. So again, that fit into the paradigm of sort of pop, R&B, rhythm and blues music. Here's a saxophone player that is in that genre playing that music, as many did, King Curtis and Cannonball and others, but my two guys were Wilton and Ronnie. Get to Texas Southern in Houston, and guess who had just left there going to L.A.? Both of them had gone to Texas Southern. I thought that was so cosmic that all of a sudden I'm there where my two heroes were. Was exposed to Arnett Cobb because he lived 4 blocks from the school, and had a vested interest in a historically black school with a jazz program, and so he would come over and talk to us, and mostly talk, but every now and then he would play. But I just, leached on to him, and I began to go visit and, just hang out, and I'd go sit in on gigs, and he'd tell me, "You play too many damn notes," and And you ain't saying nothing. You know, he was that guy who would tell you. So that was, you know, I call that really going to college, you know, being involved in his life. And from college, I got a gig with Bob James. I was playing with a band, local band in Houston, and Bob James heard me. And 2 weeks, and we opened the concert. He says the audience peaked before he ever got up there. So he said the way to keep that from ever happening again was to hire me. And so he hired me, and I was in New York 2 weeks later playing on Bob James 12 with great musicians, Gary King, you know, a lot of wonderful musicians who, again, who are harder to classify. You know, here's a guy who, Bob James was Sarah Vaughan's musical director, you know. He can play any kind of music, you know, but he has this niche with the theme from Taxi and all that. So I was in a setting where the lines weren't clearly defined. You know, it was more like, can you play, and, you know, what do you have to say? So that's sort of kind of a nutshell of my musical education, which continues to this day as we are on our cruise with some of my, sure enough, heroes, you know, the Heath brothers and Houston Person, and just some of the most beautiful saxophonists in the world. It's great. The first gig I ever actually got paid was at Libertyland in Memphis. Memphis had its own little theme park. The mascot was a hound dog, as in you ain't nothing but a hound dog. We had several shows. We had the Elvis shows. We had the Jerry Lee Lewis shows. We had the Isaac Hayes and the soul shows and all that. And so I actually, as a high school musician, had to learn music. I had to, you know, audition, reading music. You had to be prompt. You had to be well groomed. You had to wear your uniform and had to be clean. And so it was a real job. And you know, during the summer, and you know, I think 5-6 days a week. So it was wonderful, and that's one of the reasons I love being involved at the Stax Music Academy, because I want to have that kind of thing where these kids take it seriously and say, wait a minute, I can actually, not only this is my calling, I can actually make a vocation, a career out of this, sharing my gift with people.
Do you remember how much you got paid?
I do not remember. It was way more than I got paid way more than I ever imagined. You know, at the time I was a 17-year-old. It was wonderful to actually get this check, you know, the printed checks with all the formal information on it, and you tear it off. Oh, that was so beautiful.